Ray Bowman. I've been involved in international trade for over 30 years. I'm a certified global business professional, or CGBP. I'm also the director of the EDC, Small Business Development Center, part of the Los Angeles network. It's an SBA program that provides free consulting to small and medium-sized businesses. I'm also the program chair for the Southern California District Export Council. We're a group of volunteers elected by the Secretary of Commerce to promote international trade and exports and U.S. exports. I'm also a professor at Cal Lutheran University and a professor at Santa Barbara City College, which has a degree program in international trade and logistics. I'm also a member of several trade organizations, including the American Association of Importers and Exporters and NASBITE, which is an association of small business international trade educators. So for this lesson, I'm going to go over Incoterms. And Incoterms are very critical terms in international trade. They're part of the language of international trade. Basically what they are is they're three-letter codes, and these three-letter codes describe the responsibility of an international seller to an international buyer. So it sort of is an outline of what the liabilities and responsibilities are in an export transaction. So whenever you think about Incoterms, think about the fact that they relate to the exporter's liability. Whatever responsibilities and liabilities are left are those of the buyer. So you can kind of think of it as really driven by the responsibility of the seller. The other thing that's important to remember as I go through Incoterms is that the way that you show that you've performed as a seller in Incoterms is by the presentation of documents that verify that you've delivered to that particular point. And delivery point is an important aspect of Incoterms. So with each of these Incoterms, as I go through them, there's going to be a delivery point. That delivery point may be to a place, it may be to a carrier at a named place, or it may be at a destination. So as I go through these, you want to think about what the Incoterm means in terms of responsibility, the documents involved in performing against that Incoterm, and then the location of where that Incoterm is taking place or where the goods are being delivered. Now, Incoterms were developed by the International Chamber of Commerce, and the thing to remember is they're not laws, but they're practice. So they represent common practice in international trade, and these standards have been put together by the ICC. Now, as much as they're industry standards, they're often put into law or part of regulations of laws. So, for example, Incoterms are required data elements with U.S. Customs. They may be required data elements within a sales contract, or may be required for export formalities. If they're included in contracts, if they're included in laws, it'll be specified and reference that particular set of Incoterms. Incoterms get updated every 10 years, so we're currently on Incoterms 2010, so that's important to remember because the Incoterms do change, and from the year 2000 to the year 2010 there were quite a few changes in Incoterms which we'll go over. So the first Incoterm that I'd like to go over is called Ex Works, and it's one of the simplest Incoterms from the standpoint of the exporter. What it basically means is that the seller is going to make the goods available at their premises, which means that the buyer is going to have to arrange for the goods to be loaded onto the truck. They're going to have to arrange for that truck to pick up at the location of the seller. Then they're going to have to arrange for the customs formalities that are required, terminal costs, cost to load the goods onto the ship or to the plane. They're going to have to incur the costs for import formalities, working with the freight forwarder. Once the goods are cleared, they're going to arrange for delivery to their location. Within this, the seller is going to have to produce certain documents. So the seller will be responsible for producing the commercial invoice, which is basically the invoice from the seller to the buyer. They'll have to produce a packing list, which shows how the goods were packaged. A truck bill of lading. Basically, even though they're not paying for the truck, they're going to have to show proof that a truck did take delivery of the goods. And most exports require a wood packaging certificate. Anything that goes on a pallet or anything that consists of wood will need this. So it's a very common document. Another Incoterm is FCA, which means Free Carrier At. Free Carrier At is kind of an interesting Incoterm because it's really split into two different terms. The one term means that the goods will be made available to the carrier at the premises of the seller. So it's a lot like Ex Works, but the difference is in Ex Works, the buyer has to make the goods available at their premises with the responsibility of loading onto the truck that of the buyer's trucker. In FCA, you can do a similar thing to Ex Works, having the goods available at your premises, but now you're responsible as the seller for the loading onto the truck. So it's often recommended by the ICC that the term FCA is used over Ex Works for this reason. It just makes it a little bit clearer, and common practice really isn't the trucker pulling up to your door, getting in your forklift and loading the goods on. So it's a little more practical term if you want to make the goods available at your premises. FCA can also mean that the goods are being delivered to a carrier's warehouse. So that means you're contracting the trucker, and now your trucker is making those goods available to a carrier or a carrier's warehouse. And again, the way to show that you've delivered on that obligation is that you have a signed truck bill of lading that shows that the goods have been delivered either to the warehouse or to the trucker when they arrive. Again, the buyer now is responsible for the transportation of the goods, whether it's air or ocean, to clear the goods through customs, pay for any of the freight forwarding fees associated with the destination costs, pay for the inland carriage. We refer to this as either post-carriage or in Incoterms on carriage, which is the ultimate delivery and offloading to the buyer. And again, we have a commercial invoice, packing list, wood packaging certificate, and truck bill of lading. The next Incoterm, it's not as common as those first two, but it's still one that we do see, and this is called FAS, for Free Alongside Ship. Now, another thing to remember about Incoterms is we have Incoterms that can be used for any mode of transportation, and we have other Incoterms that are specific to certain types of transportation. So FAS is one of those terms that relates to sea transportation or waterway transportation. So again, we have Incoterms that relate to transportation by any mode, and we have Incoterms that relate to transportation by water, by sea, or waterway. So free alongside ship now means that the seller is going to make create the goods, have the goods available, load them onto a truck. They will have their trucker deliver those to the terminal, cover all the customs formalities, loading, making those goods available at the terminal. So they're not actually going to load the goods onto the ship, but they'll have the goods free alongside ship. This term is used mostly when the loading of the goods requires special handling. So this is when I've seen it most often. I had a client several years ago that had some goods that required some special handling. It was some very large equipment and required special cranes to load onto a ship. So rather than take the liability and the cost of the loading onto the ship, they had the buyer cover that part and simply delivered free alongside. So now the buyer is going to be responsible for loading the goods onto the ship, the customs formalities, the delivery to their destination. And again, we'll have commercial invoice, packing list, wood packaging certificate. We'll have the trucker's bill of lading as a receipt that they delivered to the terminal to show that it was alongside terminal. Next Incoterm, and this is a very common Incoterm, it applies to ocean freight only, is FOB, which stands for Free Onboard Ship. Now, Free Onboard Ship means that the seller is going to have the goods available at their warehouse. They're going to load the goods onto their truck. That truck is going to deliver to the terminal. They're going to be responsible for all of the export customs formalities. They'll be responsible for the bill of lading, which is a requirement to get it to the ocean terminal and to load it onto the ship. However, they're not going to pay for the freight. It's the buyer's responsibility to pay for the freight. It's simply the seller's responsibility to make the goods available and loaded onto the ship, as well as generating the bill of lading. So even though they're not paying for the freight, they're going to generate that bill of lading. And this is an important feature of FOB. It's an important feature because the buyer cannot take possession of the goods until the bill of lading is surrendered by the seller. And it's a very common practice for sellers to hold on to those bills of lading pending payment. So I've seen situations where the goods will arrive, the terms were FOB, the buyer paid for the freight, but the buyer wasn't able to clear the freight through customs because they hadn't transmitted payment to the seller. So this is a very important feature of FOB. It's also important to note that only an ocean bill of lading, an onboard bill of lading like this, is what we call a title document. So it actually can be held and dependent upon the seller surrendering that bill of lading. Now, this does not apply, or this idea of the bill of lading does not apply in air freight. In air freight, the bill of lading is a consignment bill of lading, and the buyer isn't required to have the original to clear the goods through customs. So that's an important feature to remember, because if you're using FOB as a way of securing, or as a seller securing the possession of the freight, the same mechanism won't happen on air freight or truck freight. So now that the seller is delivered onboard ship, now it's the buyer's responsibility to pay for the freight, clear the goods through customs, unloading, any inspection fees, and the on-carriage to the ultimate destination. And again, a commercial invoice is involved, packing list, bill of lading, ocean bill of lading this time, and wood packaging certificate. The next Incoterm, and this Incoterm begins with a C. So all of these Incoterms sort of go in order. The first term is the E term, which there's one of them, Ex Works. You have F terms, which involve delivery in the seller's origin country. And now we have C terms, and C terms involve delivery to a carrier. So one of the first C terms we're going to go over is cost and freight. So cost and freight is an ocean term. It relates to the goods being delivered not only to the port by the seller, but the seller covering the cost of the freight. Now that the goods have been shipped, the buyer now has a responsibility of making sure those goods were insured for transit, as well as clearing them through customs, covering all the customs formalities, clearing the goods, delivering them to the ultimate destination. And again, commercial invoice, packing list, bill of lading, wood packaging certificate if required. The next one is CPT. So as much as we use cost and freight to define the seller paying for the freight on the ocean, for an ocean freight shipment, if we have another mode of transportation, we might use CPT. So CPT is sort of the other mode version, or the non-ocean mode version of CFR. So again, the seller will be responsible for paying for the freight, delivering the goods, and then the buyer will clear the goods and deliver them to destination. The next term, which is an ocean term, involves transportation with the addition of ocean cargo insurance. So this one is CIF, and CIF is a very common term. Now, if you're using the term CIF, now the seller will be responsible not only for the goods, the trucking, the export formalities, getting them to the terminal, loading them onto the ship, but being responsible for the cost of freight transportation and cargo insurance. Once the goods arrive, the buyer is going to be responsible for clearing the goods through customs, transport, ultimate delivery to their destination. And now the sellers are going to be responsible for producing the commercial invoice, the packing list, bill of lading, ocean freight bill of lading, an insurance certificate, and wood packaging certificate if it's required. So it's a very common term. If we're using another mode of transportation, not ocean, then instead of CIF, we use the term CIP, which is carriage and insurance paid to. So it's very much like CIF. The seller is going to be responsible for the goods, the pre-carriage, customs formalities, getting the goods to the terminal, paying for the ocean for the freight, not ocean freight, but other mode of transportation, let's say air freight. And then the buyer will be responsible for clearing the goods once they arrive and the transportation to the ultimate destination. And again, commercial invoice, packing list. I gave the example of an airway bill because this is for other modes of transportation other than ocean, insurance documents, and wood packaging certificate if required. Now we go on to D terms. So I often think of D terms as destination terms. So now we had the F terms, which involve delivery on the seller's origin country. We had C terms, which included freight. And so now we have D terms, which involve delivery in the destination country. So the first Incoterm we have is called delivered at terminal. So the seller is going to be responsible not only for delivering the goods, getting them to the terminal, paying for the freight and insurance, but now they'll be responsible for the offloading of the goods and making them available at the destination terminal, at which point the buyer will be responsible for customs formalities, any costs related to customs brokerage fees, and delivery to the ultimate destination. And again, the same documents are required: commercial invoice, packing list, bill of lading, insurance documents, and wood certificate if required. The next term is DAP. So that stands for delivered at place. And one thing to keep in mind with all these Incoterms is each of these Incoterms is followed by the name of that place it's being delivered to. So, for example, if we go back to the term FOB, FOB is going to be followed by the named place, which is the port at which, or the port terminal at which those goods are delivered to. In CIF, we're going to describe the delivery point of destination, where the goods are traveling to. And in DAP, we're going to describe where the goods are ultimately being delivered to at the buyer's location. So DAP includes all of the origin costs that we mentioned, the manufacture of the goods, the pickup of the goods, the trucking to the port, customs formalities, the terminal, the freight costs, clearing, delivering the goods once they're cleared through customs, and delivering them clear to the buyer. Now, the one thing that the seller is not covering in this scenario is the customs clearance of the goods and the payment of duty. So that is up to the buyer. So basically, this represents a door-to-door delivery to the buyer, with the exception of the customs clearance. The next term we have is DDP, and DDP is basically a door-to-door delivery. So the seller is going to be responsible for all of the steps mentioned previously, paying for the freight, picking up of the goods, plus clearance, paying for the duties, and delivering to the ultimate destination. So if any of you have sent a FedEx shipment, UPS shipment, and you've paid for everything, then the term would be DDP for that.